vote, and I am here pending the vote of the Congress to give the residents of the District of Columbia the same vote that your constituents had when you were here making trouble and doing good.
As a former member, I supported your opportunity to do that, Ms. Norton.
And we certainly will miss your vote when the bill comes up. So I thank you, and the members will reappear. I call on next gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Secretary, I want to say I've always appreciated your intelligence and your feistiness. It's how you arrive at truth, and it's the only way we get at truth. And I appreciate that. First, let me say, so nothing's misunderstood, I don't represent a Toyota district. I represent a GM district. Fort Wayne's the proud manufacturer of the Silverado and Sierra. My manufacturers supply all auto companies, but mostly the big three. But this whole ruckus about Toyota has bothered me personally in watching this process. 100% risk-free is your goal, but it's not really achievable. It's not achievable on bicycles or ice skating or horseback riding or anything. You try to get that, but we've kind of held them up to an artificial standard here. And I'm concerned that even just like by dragging Mr. Toyota through this or asking you questions like, are you completely 100% safe in a Toyota? What are you supposed to say? That it leads me to ask a couple of questions that you may not be able to answer all these today, but I'd really appreciate looking at this because this needs a thorough looking at and a fair looking at and not acting like it's just one car company. One is that no vehicle is 100% safe. Isn't that true?
Our goal is to make sure that vehicles are 100% safe, Mr. Souter.
But no vehicle is 100% safe.
Our goal
okay.
will continue to make sure that cars are 100%
secondly,
safe.
You said that all Toyotas that are on a safety recall should, you obviously can't, you're even less confident of their safety if they're on a recall. Wouldn't you encourage people, if they have a safety recall on any of the car companies, of which you said this is one of the largest, but not the largest. Any car company that has a safety recall. Of course,
absolutely. In the last 3 years, 23 million cars have been recalled.
From all the companies.
And the vast majority of them have not been Toyotas.
Thank you.
So anytime there's a recall, people should take their car in and get it fixed, of course.
Yes, and that's very logical. Right now, the kind of whole world media is focused on one of the companies, and I just want to make sure that
I can give you a whole list of cars that are on recall, Mr. Souter, and I'd be happy to do that for the record.
And isn't I'd appreciate that. And isn't one of the challenges here is that I know from my district, almost every supplier supplies all the big three. Some we don't have enough suppliers anymore to be unique in the United States. And most of them supply some of Honda and Toyota. And one of the things that strikes me here is that you should find out, not just looking at Toyota, but where is a common supplier? And if that supplier was supplying just Toyota, as opposed to other suppliers, if it's supplying other companies and it isn't occurring there, what would be the unique thing that's happening in Toyota? And I don't have a confidence right now that that's occurring, but I would think it's kind of a basic research question right now. You did represent a industrial district too that had companies, and I think that's a fair thing. Now, we also have a question of the difference between first let me ask you, you agree with this, right? That some is sudden acceleration and some is slow return.
Yes. Yeah.
And that the deaths, which have dramatically increased since all the publicity, the allegations, but the proven number was 14, then it's gone up to 39 that are now in question, and more coming, were all related to the sudden acceleration, not to the slow return. The slow return, I think you correctly said, is a potential danger, but the sudden acceleration, every single one of the deaths related to that.
That's correct.
And that the CTS is one of the suppliers. They're not in my district, they're in Joe Donnelly's, but a lot of the people work in my district. And in visiting them, they had the slow return, and they were first fingered by Toyota. But in fact, none of the parts on the sudden acceleration were actually made in the United States. They were all Japanese suppliers. And that I think we need to, rather than we need to look comprehensively by model and start to look at this unique supplier question, because that, for example, CTS supplies several different companies, whether those Japanese suppliers in fact supply other companies as well in this kind of supply system. Another thing that I would appreciate more detail on is that one of the things that I'm worried about happening in the regulation is that it was just stated a number of times that Toyota was looking at this and they were researching this, and Europe had different standards, so they started to do that. One of the dangers here with the lawsuits, and particularly watching what's happening to Toyota sales right now, is around the world they're getting basically, in my opinion, smeared, possibly justly. I mean, I don't really know all the details yet, but they're getting attacked before all the evidence is in, as I just suggested in the suppliers. That part of the question here is, will we in fact have a discouraging impact on companies checking out every concern if it's going to be drugged into the public eye, that documents are going to be released, whether it's this committee, I'm not accusing you, but this committee may be responsible for that, before all the evidence is in. And one of the challenges here, we ran into this in the quote, trailer controversy in FEMA, which now clearly has not been established, but had this big bubble. We said 0 toxins, and then we find out that this room had more toxins in it than the trailers. We're finding this in orthopedic devices. We're finding this in all kinds of things that we kind of react, and then the companies are afraid even to do the research. The bureaucrats in the organizations require more and more paperwork. We drive prices up because all vehicles and all parts are a combination of what's convenience, what's price, what's the tolerance. When you go to 99.9 versus 99.7, there's cost to the consumers. If we all drove 20 miles an hour, we'd have fewer deaths. And that in this process, are you at all concerned that we're in fact going to silence research by the manufacturers and increase risk or increase costs or other types of things?
Not at all. I think what we'll do is sensitize manufacturers to the idea that safety has to be their #1 priority, and until they get to that point, they should manufacture cars where they can tell the driving public that they're going to be safe.
Wouldn't lowering the speed limit to 30?
Pardon me?
Wouldn't lowering the speed limit to 30 save a lot more lives? And you don't.
Well, the research doesn't show that. I mean, look, on an interstate highway, we have minimum speed limits. You're not going to. Look at Mr. Souter, that's not a very good illustration. Lowering the speed limit on an interstate highway to 30 would make it very dangerous.
The reason you have a minimum is because you have a maximum. If you lowered the maximum to 30, you wouldn't need a minimum. The point being,
I don't buy your argument, Mr. Souter.
You can save lives with other types of things. The question is, what is the trade-off of lives, convenience, so on? We've seen this in horseback riding. We've seen it in skateboarding, that you have a difficult job. Your goal is 100%. But we have to have some balance here between risk, cost, and benefit.
Madam Chair, I mean, if I could just respond. Our job is not for people who ride horses or skateboards